our previous webinar, similar webinar on Monday. If there are questions that you ask or that are asked in the chat today that were answered in the webinar on Monday, I might via the chat refer you to that recording for the sake of answering as many questions as possible. So before we dive in, I just also want to remind everyone that we are in really uncharted waters here. Everyone is working really hard to figure out the best way to support students and families and to support you and your schools. So please be patient with David, Susie, and Daniele if they can't answer every question with as specific an answer as I know they'd like to be able to give. And I know I speak for them when I say that. So Yomika, I'm just going to check on Yomika. Let's see if she wants to take over. All right, so we'll dive in on some questions for David and Susie in particular. So the topic of the 180-day waiver continues to come up, and I think schools are now aware that it is not automatic necessarily. Is there anything that schools should be doing to anticipate this process or needing to complete some sort of application?
Yeah, so there is a waiver process. The 180-day, the proclamation or the executive order signed by the executive does set forth a waiver process. It's not a process that we have, that we've sorted out yet. I can't imagine that it would be a process that is exclusionary, but rather a process that seeks to include as many schools as possible. But it's something that we're working on very closely with the governor's office to develop further guidance around. I think, and what you'll probably hear a lot from us throughout this call is the best thing that you can do is, one, make sure that you're attending to the health and safety of your students and staff members, but ensure that you do have a robust educational continuity of education plan, and that you're implementing it and you're keeping records of who's participating, how you're reaching out to students, and include as many students as possible, particularly those students who might have a disability, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students who might have a harder time accessing your program.
And David, just to be really clear, you're giving that guidance in the category of best practice as opposed to anticipating that some specific provision of a 180-day waiver process might include those things?
Right now, I'm giving that as a best practice. However, Susie and I are talking a lot about what we need to collect as authorizers in order to, one, ensure that we're continuing to provide robust monitoring and oversight of our school, but also that should we be asked, for example, how much instruction are you giving, we're able to answer those questions. And so the first step is collecting those continuity of education plans, and each authorizer is collecting them on their own. And I know the New York City DOE sent out an email today. SUNY has been collecting those plans, and we'll probably be sending out an email tomorrow to Board of Regents authorized charter schools. But right now, there is no specific guidance. But the best thing to do is make sure that you're continuing to keep records, just like you would in your traditional educational setting.
Can I just, can I pile on a little bit to David's comment?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because things are so fluid, and our impression at SUNY is that schools have been rightly focused on lifting up their teachers in order to provide remote educational opportunities for their kids. That's what we've tried to stay out of the way of as much as possible. So all of our schools have given us some preliminary continuing education information that we asked for, and we cannot thank you all enough for spending time feeding us at SUNY a little bit. But some of our schools, and I am committed to shouting out to everybody, but today I'm going to shout out to Uncommon and Ascend and Central Queens Academy and Explore, because we have gotten really lovely updates forwarded from what I think the school leaders are doing for the boards anyway. So for example, one of the schools today, it was a board chair that just said, hey, here's what we got from our leaders today. And it gave us such a rich understanding of what you were doing. And we appreciate that. But it's also informing, as David suggested, what we think the capacities may be in terms of data collection, because we perceive that there may be a time when we want to say, in this extraordinary circumstance, here were the number of kids that we had continuing on every day. Here were the hours that teachers were spending contacting students every day, from just being on a cell phone. Some of them, for the younger kiddos, there are a couple of phone calls happening between teacher and home to make sure that there's a continuity of education going on. And David's right. We had a conversation earlier today about, what the possibilities were. And before we decide what's possible, I think we'll reach out to all of you to give us some input on the kinds of data you can collect and report, because we want to be able to advocate for all of you and the work that your teachers and kiddos and parents and families are doing today and every day while we're out.
Great, thank you both. And so that actually leads perfectly into our next question and some questions that are already coming up in the chat around this question of distance learning. And so I know when we talked on Monday, you all had some general guidance about best practice, which you're reiterating here. But do you have any new guidance or even reflections? So for example, Susie, on things that you're seeing, like tracking attendance, participation in online forums, collecting artifacts of student work. And David, we're also starting to get some questions we received in advance and are coming through in the chat as well. Folks are very curious to have a preview of what will be in the portal that they will be asked to submit things to.
You want to start, David, or do you want me to go?
You go ahead.
Okay. So best practices are like a greenfield, brand new world for us, but I think they're going to be informed by what we know for best practices in a bricks and mortar setting. So yes, the best data you can keep about interactions with students for attendance. So some of the online systems, K-12 isn't in place in New York, so I'm going to use them as an example. The data for the K-12 cyber schools material keeps track of how long kids are on every day, which kids are on, what kind of interactions they've had with teachers, etc. Every one of us is doing something different, slightly different. There are many commonalities, but slightly different about their interactions with kids to make sure that there's some continuous access to learning. And so if you can think really clearly about how to demonstrate connections with your kids and ask your teachers to keep counts of that, whether that's the couple of times a day phone call, or we know that some of our schools are having FaceTime work, again, with the lower aged kids and more robust online interaction with their upper age students. Think really smartly about how you're recording that. Oh, that's my cell phone. My apologies. It's one of you that's not on this calling me. The other thing that would be really helpful, every time the Institute comes to schools, kind of ask for a sampling of student work that includes English language learners, students with special needs, your kind of solid C+ students, and your really high flyers, so that we get a look at what all of the student work might look like. And in the same way, if you can think about major student work products, most likely at the upper grades, right? It's tough for me sitting here to think about major student work products at the lower primary grades. But think about curating sets of those materials based on the projects that your students are doing. That will be also helpful to all of us together in advocating the ways in which we've moved the education of our kiddos forward in this time. Thanks, David, for letting me go first.
No problem. I don't think I have anything else to add.
Well, let me ask a follow-on question. Michael and I have been having a little bit of an interaction over the chat around this question of truancy. And so, Michael, I'm going to expand a little bit on the question that you asked and just ask David and Susie if there are students who schools are entirely unable to be in touch with, or that they have particular concerns about, and they feel as if their sort of typical portfolio of actions in this circumstance are not being successful. Is there anything that you would suggest that they do?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me about that, or maybe there's three things. One is whether or not that family has access to the technology necessary to support that child. And of course, if you can't interact with them, it's tough to say specifically what technology they do or don't have available. So that's one thing all of us have to consider, including us, your authorizer. I think the other thing will be developing as I know New York City is going to talk a little bit about the centers they have for students of first responders and others, and that will be the same across the state. To the extent that you are having a hard time contacting a student whose family both has people, employed in a first responder support category for all of us in society, as well as somebody whose family member is stocking the shelves at Walmart or CVS, those families may be having a difficult time in accessing the supports we're putting out there. And so just knowing that, right, is important, understanding the efforts you've put in place. But I do think there are going to be students in families where this is very difficult to navigate for them, and we will figure that out as it moves along. We can't, so effort and concern, every one of our schools has talked about all the efforts and concerns they're putting in place to contact their kids. I know that teachers have been, getting in their own personal vehicles and driving laptops and leaving them at doorsteps and doing that kind of work. And as you guys are doing that, please, the emails you're sending us are super valuable. But I don't think there's there will not be a hard and fast rule from SUNY about kids who you've worked really hard to contact with, who it might not be working.
Yeah, I think similarly for us, we want, these are uncharted territories. We don't think that our schools are experts just yet in providing remote instruction. And you need to do your best in order to ensure that as many students as possible are getting the best education as possible. And we, just like our expectations for schools when they're operating, we expect you to use your considerable autonomy to change, and if things aren't working, do something else, do something different. I was just talking to a school leader from the West Buffalo Charter School, and they found that it's really efficacious to have calls with students every day. They call it office hours. I know Success Academy is doing the same thing, where they're reaching out and they're trying to problem solve with parents and students as to how they can best access the remote curriculum that the school is providing. So Be communicative with your parents and your students. That should go a long way. We also know that your plans are going to change, and to address your question from before about the portal, SED is not going to require anything of non-Board of Regents authorized charter schools in the portal. The portal is just, the plans submitted through the portal will just be for Board of Regents authorized schools. The other schools, as I mentioned before, will submit their plans to their authorizer. And we don't want to be that prescriptive about them, because we know that there are many different ways to serve students in this new environment. And we want you to be just as thoughtful and creative about the instruction you're providing now as you are when you're back in your school buildings.
Thank you both. So a new wrinkle, a new set of questions that I think has come up recently as folks are looking further ahead is related to student promotion in general, as well as how it links to lotteries. So how should schools be thinking about student promotion generally, given this uncertain time, but also in the specific near term about how many open seats to identify for their lotteries?
I think first and foremost, schools need to be very thoughtful about their return strategies. So once you're back in your building, and we're all going to be back in our buildings, hopefully sooner rather than later, what are the supports and interventions that you're going to provide students so that they hit the ground running, that you're providing targeted interventions to ensure that any missed time is made up? And that might mean, and I want to throw it out there, although nothing's mandated yet, that might mean, are you going to school during the summer? Are you going to school during vacation times? We want schools to really be thoughtful about that before saying we're going to hold everyone back. Charter schools do have a considerable amount of autonomy, and as of today, there are no requirements on our part, and there's certainly no statutory or requirements or executive orders that are going to force you to promote all students to the next grade. But I'm sure we're all aware of considerable headache that that's going to cause, and heartache that that's going to cause not only our students but families. And then what opportunities are you denying to the next wave of children who maybe were planning or hoping to get into your school so that they can partake in the educational opportunities that you're providing? I think this is something that that more guidance will come out later on, but it also might be something that is really left up to the schools and educators to determine as to what works best for their own situation.
Susie, any thoughts?
I think that, I'm sorry, I got distracted by the chat information asking about the lottery and other things. So apologies. Can you help me make sure that I'm responding to the right question?
Yeah, well, let's take it. We'll take it up to 50,000.
Promotion, right?
Yeah.
It was grade level promotion.
Yeah, but before we do that, let's just acknowledge, because I just saw Ashley's question in the chat. So the guidance earlier this week was that if schools wanted to postpone their lottery dates, they needed to be in touch with their authorizers, and that was possible. The question now is also, how should schools be thinking about promotion in general,
right,
but also in terms of how many seats they're then identifying as available in the context of their lottery?
So this is the State University of New York Charter Schools Institute would never ever consider at this point, but at many points, that we would know more about which individual students should be promoted than the school. I think that from a parent perspective, this has been 3 weeks ago, things were challenging for many parents and many school leaders on this call and many teachers. And so I think this has been pretty distracting. So the idea of, so I think there's a couple of issues embedded here. One is, what's the right thing to do in terms of providing continued services and supports and educational extras for kids who might not be at grade level. And the second one is, what is our guidance about your charter status if you promote kids based on any standard? And so our advice is going to be at SUNY. We're happy to talk to you individually about any particular issue, but you all at some point, if we are elongated in this separation, going to have to think very carefully about your student population and your promotion policies. And I hope everybody that says SUNY school, and actually, really anybody on here, we'd be happy to have a separate conversation with the SUNY the Institute's legal counsel folks about both what the legal requirements are for promotion. My hunch is David's going to chime in that those might change too, or there might be some relaxation of those. I'll let him speak for himself. But we want to hear from you what you think is the smartest, reasonable thing to do when the circumstances begin to be clearer, and they're not very clear today about promotion.
Thank you, guys. And so we had heard from folks in advance, and obviously now also coming up on the chat, specifically about the June Regents administration. So I'll ask that question first, but then I think it's probably worth touching back on the overall status of state tests in general. And so in terms of the June Regents specifically, David, do you have any updates, insight, information about whether or not they will be held? And if they are held, if there will be any consideration for obviously the amount of time that students have not been in school as a lead up to them?
Yeah, and so this applies to 3 through 8 assessments as well. New York State is working very closely with our partners at the US DOE to try to get a waiver for state assessments for this year. We don't have that waiver yet, although it's been well reported in the news media, we're not alone in making that request. Once that request is granted, at that point, we can consider waiving the state assessments, but we do have to work with the federal government in order to do that. As some people in the chat correctly said, the delivery of the ELA assessments for the 3 through 8 kids, that has been delayed as of now, and additional information will be forthcoming. I don't have any information on math, and I certainly don't have information on the Regents exams. A few things that have been kicked around, although, again, we're waiting for information for our partners in Washington, D.C. as to a waiver, but thinking about providing a blanket pass to students who maybe are in Regents exams right now, to having students retake those exams or make them up in August or in December. Lots of ideas, very little concrete information right now. And as that information develops, and as we have a better picture of what Washington will allow and won't allow us, we'll certainly send that out to the field. I would, though, plan to provide the best education you can to students, so no matter what happens, you can feel comfortable and confident, and we can feel comfortable and confident that students are, that we're minimizing the learning gap, and that we're helping to avoid a knowledge slide that sometimes we see during the summer when we're not providing instruction.
All right. So last question before we transition to DOE. And again, I want to recognize.
Oh, and sorry to interrupt, Anna. And
no problem.
So I just saw someone asked about the NYSA slide, and the same holds true for the NYSA slide. It's been delayed, and we're looking for guidance from the US DOE as to how to proceed. So sorry to interrupt. No,
not at all. Thank you. And I think on that note, just want to reflect to some of the questions on the chat that they're all great questions. We will continue to have webinars like these. And so as information becomes more clear, we will endeavor to collect these questions and answer them in a similar format on a regular basis going forward. So last question, although this in many ways I know is a sort of the big one, and one that's really weighing heavily, I think, on lots of people's minds. And David, and Susie, I know on yours as well, and has appeared a lot in the chat, even up to this point in this webinar. Are there any updates about special education services, and in particular, how to best provide and document IEP services to students with disabilities in the current circumstances?
Can I tag in? I'm gonna give Agnelli and David a moment to think about that. They're also, Anna, sorry to grab onto your
Please.
webinar. I just want to put out there have been a number of questions about the lottery, and we've had some conversations about April 1st, delaying, parents can't get in to determine if your school is the school they want to go to. New schools that are opening have lost some real traction in being able to hit the ground running, get people to apply to them. Anna, so first of all, I think generally, if anything happens with the lottery date, we would love your input. So the lottery date's April 1st. You don't have to hold your lottery by April 1st. The state, we could kind of say everybody press hold on their lottery, hold it at a later date. I think our best method going forward is if you can either provide Anna, the folks at the New York City Charter School Center, David, me, Agnelli, information about what you think should happen with the lottery, that would help us navigate whether or not we can move the lottery dates and for what purpose. So I will now let the team return to the team that actually do the special education oversight and review, return to the questions about provision of special education services. But I just felt like there were a lot of lottery questions coming up, and we want to be informed by what you're thinking and the parameters you're thinking about before we get too far down the conversation. Thanks, Anna.
Absolutely, absolutely.
To build upon one of the other lottery questions, we right now, as things stand, you are still required to hold your lottery if you receive more applications than you have seats available on April 1st. Now, that doesn't mean you hold your lottery on April 1st. That means that you hold the lottery if you have more applications than seats by April 1st. That might change. As Susie said, we'd love to hear your thoughts on whether that April 1st date should be delayed. And that's something that would require, though, an executive order as well as a regulatory change. But we'd love to know if that would be beneficial. And then pertaining to special education, the federal government, the US DOE, has given states the ability to allow telepractice in certain situations. And some districts like New York City are taking that up and are actually allowing some flexibilities in terms of the provision of services for students with disabilities. Like in all cases, including in the current situation, any change of placement must be coordinated through your Committee on Special Education. And so my recommendation for charter schools is to reach out to your CSE, ask them what their guidance is and how they're proceeding. CSE meetings still are required to take place. They can take place remotely now. The Committee on Special Ed should still include the parent. It should include the teacher of the child. So that means your school. But this really is something that you should be coordinating with your districts. And so I'll see if Anjali wants to weigh in and provide any additional information from a New York City perspective.
Yeah, thanks, David, because we'll transition now to New York City specific topics. But one thing I do want to respond to from the chat that I think is a theme that's coming through that's really real for lots of schools for lots of different reasons is the potential importance or benefit of New York City schools having some amount of communication and collaboration around the timing of any amended lottery. so that there isn't any sort of unintended consequence about those schools acting at different timings. And I know I know I speak for the Charter Center when I say that as the folks who administer that application, that's very likely something that they would be very sensitive to. And I think this moment more than ever, you know, folks are in very similar situations and wanting to be helpful and collaborative. And so I would just say to everyone, like, have faith. We will figure it out, and we will figure it out together for sure.
Well
So
said.
thank you. Thank you. All right. So transitioning to New York City specific questions. So folks who are not on schools from New York City, you're more than welcome to stay on. We will also be using the chat transcript to make sure that if there are unanswered questions that they appear in future communications, either from us or on a future webinar. So if your questions were not answered, we apologize for that. It may be because those questions are at this point things that at least in my read of the chat are things I know are not particularly well suited to a specific answer at this point, but we will absolutely do our best to get those questions answered, and we'll be hosting another one of these next week, so be on the lookout for that. So I also want to share, as we transition to New York City DOE specific questions and issues, that Agnelli has shared that they will be sending a memo out later tonight or tomorrow that will capture answers to a lot of the questions that they've received, and potentially also some of the common questions that we're going to ask her to field right now. And then in addition, for special education topics in particular, where there was new DOE guidance released earlier, the New York City Charter Center is hosting a call tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Special education leaders should have gotten a communication about that through the collaborative. If you did not, and you would like more information about that, please reach out to the New York City Charter Center, because that will be specific to special education issues in New York City, which again, huge area of concern for lots of folks right now. So Nellie, first let me make sure I'm getting the technology right here and that you are unmuted before I ask you. All right, I'm unmuting you. All right, and Yeli, can you make sure? Excellent, thank you. All right, so could you start off by giving a quick update about the status of school food and grab and go meals?
Yeah, for sure. I do want to add though, before I go on to that, Anna, just to follow up on the question about special education. As you mentioned, we did send a memo yesterday. If you didn't receive that, feel free to email us at charterschools@schools.nyc.gov, and I'm happy to share that information. In addition to the sector-wide call that we're holding with the Charter School Center tomorrow at 3, we're also going to be adding office hours, and also we're preparing a frequently asked questions document to support with this effort. So more to come. I know that there are a lot of questions on that topic. Additionally, I do want to share that the CSCs have moved to remote practice, meaning that all previously scheduled IEP meetings are being held over the phone, and they are going to continue to schedule new IEP meetings as well. Now to the grab and go question. So through tomorrow, any student in New York City under the age of 18 is able to walk into any district school building across the city and pick up both breakfast and lunch at the same time, just for one day through tomorrow. So anyone, you know, under 18 can pick up in any district building. Starting on Monday though, starting on Monday the 23rd, we are shifting to just 400 sites. And these sites will also just provide 1 day's worth of breakfast and lunch to families. As Anna mentioned, we are sending out a memo with more information either tonight or tomorrow morning, outlining the addresses of those 400 sites.
Great. I'm going to use this opportunity to tap Yomika back in so we can divide and conquer. She was fielding some questions about the broken link. So Yomika, I'll turn it over to you and I'll be manning the chat.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Anna, and hello, Agnelli. I will ask the next question, which we have, which is, can staff or students in co-located buildings have access to their buildings?
Good question. We're also going to include this in the memo that we sent out. So through tomorrow, staff members and students, well, actually, let me back up. Through tomorrow, staff members may access DOE buildings. If you're doing distribution of Chromebooks or other devices, you can have parents or students come and pick them up through tomorrow. That will change starting on Monday. So starting on Monday, only leadership staff members, i.e. principals, APs, DOOs, whatever you consider leader in your school is, will have access to the building to just pick up mail, reset servers, you know, things like that. On a grab and go basis, right? So it's not expected that you will sit down and do work. It's just for you to go in and have access to essential materials.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, are there any changes to the upcoming per pupil billing invoices that you can talk about?
Sure. And Jamika, if I may just say one more thing about the access to DOE buildings. If you are having issues with your custodian for any reason and giving you access to the building as I described, please do escalate situations to our email address, and I'll repeat it again. So charterschools@schools.nyc.gov. You can escalate that way. Please make sure to indicate in the subject line the name of your school and your DBN. As you can imagine, we're getting a lot of emails, so that can help us just navigate our inboxes quicker. Okay, so to your question, Jamika, per pupil invoicing. So as you may know already, our invoice vendor portal just opened on the 18th. And the guidance that we are giving schools right now is that you should be completing your per pupil invoice with existing guidance, right? So complete your invoice as, you know, following the same guidance as you have throughout the whole year. As you know, the per pupil is a cumulative, it's a cumulative snapshot of the enrollment of your student at, you know, at your school. And right now we open the vendor portal on the 18th. And so the data that is being captured is from your first day of school through the 18th. And so there should be very little impact as it relates to closures at the moment. Our expectation right now is that when we receive guidance from SCD regarding the per pupil overall, schools will have to make adjustments as needed in the reconciliation cycle that will happen in July.
Okay, great, thank you. And one more question. Can you explain about the shift to teletherapy? Is there any timeline for more guidance related to your special education services and situations? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'm sorry, this is a little repetitive from before. So we are gathering questions, you know, through the Charter School Center right now. We're doing a phone call on Friday at 3 p.m. If you need that invite, please feel free to email us at charterschools.nyc.gov, and we'll send you that invite. Right now, we expect to be shifting to teletherapy, as I mentioned, for speech counseling, OT, and PT as appropriate, right? So our physicians, therapists, rather, are gonna be doing an assessment of each individual student to figure out what's appropriate. Now, I will say this just to address the question that David raised before around change of placement. We're also getting information ready to send out to charter schools about that as well.
Okay, thank you again. All right, so those were all of the advanced questions. Right now, I'm going to turn this back over to Anna, who is going to ask some of the questions that came through the chat. I just want to remind everyone, if we don't get to all the questions, which everyone can see, there are a lot of questions here, please look to our forum discussion. Some of that stuff you can ask on the forum and possibly get some answers there, but we'll also try to get some answers following our discussion. And so, Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. So, Anyele, a lot of specific questions regarding the grab-and-go food. So in particular, is there a list of those current sites? Are any of them located at charter schools? Do you have any, I mean, I think potentially if there's a list and that will be readily available, that will probably answer a lot of these questions that folks are asking.
Yeah. Yep. So the answer to that is yes, and we're going to be following up in our email tonight or first thing tomorrow morning with the specific sites.
Great, thank you. So also huge shout out to Bill Holmes. If folks didn't see in the chat that Global Community Charter School has the opportunity to also deliver some breakfasts and lunches. And so if you want to reach out to him but don't have his contact information, you can either hit him up in the chat right now or email us and we'll be happy to make an introduction. So moving off of the food question, Anyele, can you confirm that the district is sending high school offer letters tomorrow or in the near future?
I'm going to get an answer to that, Anna, and I can coordinate with you to send an email to this group.
Thanks, perfect. For what it's worth, I have already seen some media coverage that implies that they are available. So I think they are in the near term. And so on this topic of the teletherapy in particular, I think there are a few questions related to things like attendance and communication and collaboration with the charter schools. Do you have any insight into what the linkages will be between either things like attendance systems that exist through things like ATS or link backs and communications with the teletherapy service providers to folks at the charter schools?
Mm-hmm. Anna, I'm not sure that I understand the question, but here, I'll say what I can. So some charter schools take attendance in ATS. This is not a requirement, this is an option. And for those that do take attendance in ATS, we'll share the guidance that we've shared across the district around attendance codes for COVID-19 so that you can follow those steps if you do take attendance. Our therapists and our providers will be working very closely with schools, with special education coordinators in particular, and with families on the ground to coordinate services. And so if a student for some reason is not available on any given day, the expectation is that that provider will make record of that, because they do have to encounter attendance. And so if a student is not available on any given day, that would be recorded.
And so in terms of beginning those services, will those related service providers, the sort of teletherapy folks, be directly in touch with students, or will they be going through the charter schools? Do you know, to set those up?
Yeah, so right now our plan is that our schools should be reaching out to providers, and you know, there may be instances in which providers may, you know, be ahead of the curve and reach out to schools. But our plan right now is that that touch point should happen in advance of having therapists or providers contact families directly.
Great, thank you. And can you speak briefly to the timeline and cycle of IEP meetings? What's being held right now? What's being scheduled?
Mm-hmm. So previously scheduled IEP meetings are gonna be held over the phone, and our CSCs are continuing to work with special education coordinators and directors to schedule future meetings as well.
Great. And so then similar related question. So I think folks, what I'm seeing a lot of really technical questions about the teletherapists. Agnelli, you tell me what makes the most sense in terms of addressing those now. Will that be covered in your memo?
Yeah, I think, Anna, the best way forward for the more granular questions regarding teletherapy is to hold on a minute to, for the call that we're holding tomorrow at 3. And, we're also going to make more opportunities, or we're going to create more opportunities to support schools through office hours. And, if more opportunities are needed, we'll do that as well.
Great, thank you so much. So a facility related question, and potentially this is specific to an individual facility, but are you aware of facilities being working to be converted now into other uses in a way that might have implications for co-located charter schools?
Good question. The short answer to that is yes. And we are getting ready to do some outreach to the co-located charters that this affects. And so, as it was mentioned earlier, we are launching regional enrichment centers, or RECs, for the families, for the students, for the parents, right, that are first responders, healthcare workers, transit workers, etc. And we have identified 60 locations and potentially more across the city for that purpose. And some of them are in co-located spaces. And, if that affects your school, we will be directly in touch with you by tomorrow.
Thank you. And so if there's anyone listening in right now who is aware of that circumstance for their school, they should wait to hear from you tomorrow, or should they proactively reach out to you if they're concerned now?
They should wait to hear from us tonight or tomorrow. Yep.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I'm sensitive to everyone's time. And as I said earlier, we will be posting a recording of this meeting on our website. We hope to get it up later on this evening, and we will be planning to host some encore performances with this star-studded cast. So thank you again to Susie and David and Yeli for taking the time and for all of the care and consideration that you're showing in this difficult time. And thanks everyone for taking the time to participate. Again, I know we didn't get to absolutely everything, but we are happy to be resources, and I know I speak for others on this call that we are available to you, and that we will continue to navigate this absolutely unprecedented moment together. So thanks again, everyone, and we will be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.